Welcome to my kitchen. My name is Karen. I am a chef, a nutritionist, an author, and a University of California certified master food preserver. So I spend a lot of time in my kitchen. Throughout the years, I have gradually lessened my use and exposure to plastic, to the point where I can say that my kitchen is about 80% plastic free. And you know what? The energy in my kitchen, and by extension, my entire home, feels a lot better. I think it's just because there are a lot less plastic particles floating around in the air. I know definitely that I feel a lot healthier. And I think most of you understand by now that our exposure to micro and nanoplastic particles is devastating to our health. But you know, it's not only about us humans. Plastic particles are also harming our animals, both domestic and in the wild. It is polluting our oceans and forests. It's just bad for the entire planet. And of course, what about future generations? So you know what? We need to hunker down and do this together. We really need to lessen our use and exposure to plastic. If it feels a little overwhelming to you right now, I would like to remind you that our wide use of plastic products in the kitchen has only been around for a few decades. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents, all of our ancestors managed pretty well without ever having to use a plastic spatula or a Ziploc bag. So we can do this. We can really lessen our use and exposure to plastic, step by step. Tip number 1, stop using plastic bags, including Ziploc food storage bags and other plastic food storage containers. In May of 2025, a lawsuit was filed against C.S. Johnson, the company that manufactures Ziploc bags. For years, they have claimed that the bags are safe when used in high temperature or in the freezer, and that the bags can be reused over and over. But current research is showing that part of the forever chemicals, such as polyethylene and polypropylene, used in the manufacturing of these bags are not safe. They actually shed microplastic particles, which we know is not good for our health. In addition, that Ziploc mechanism is a choking hazard for wildlife when the bags are released into the ocean or into landfills. So please, stop using them. There are actually many sustainable and healthy ways to store your food, not having to use plastic. And I will show you the methods that I have been using for years. But before I do, I want to share with you one interesting statistic. According to the Center for Biological Diversity, the average American uses 365 bags per year. So if we make our commitment not to use plastic, particularly plastic bags, then it will make a huge impact, because when you multiply that commitment by thousands of people, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, it will definitely go a long way to removing plastic pollution from our environment. So, of course we can do this, and especially if we do this together. In terms of storing food without the use of plastic, freezing is probably the most challenging. I'm going to show you 2 ways that I use, one to store fruit and another to store meat. So, Here's a jar of beautifully frozen strawberries in a wide-mouth mason jar. The best way to do it is to put your raw fruit on a tray and put them in the freezer for about an hour or so until they are frozen individually. And then you just pop them into the jar, and look how beautiful these are. And they will keep this way for months in the freezer. Just make sure that the lid is nice and tight. Now, let's move on to tip number 2, which is related to tip number 1. So tip number 2, do not use plastic food wrap. Very similar to Ziploc bags or other plastic containers, plastic food wrap shed microplastic particles, especially when you heat it up in the microwave and even when you just store it in the fridge. Plus, with the plastic wrap, you're handling it, so the microplastic particles are always being dispersed. What are the options? Plenty of options. Now, I think many of you are familiar with the bees wrap. So this is something that I have used for many, many years. And they can be used over and over, which is great. So you can, wrap something around it, or you can put it over a bowl and do that, and then put it in your fridge. Now, my favorite way to store food is to actually use glass jars. And I have glass jars of many different shapes and sizes. Now, this is some leftover rice. So it fits into this beautiful glass jar right here. This one is actually made in France. I love it because it has a wide opening. So all I do is I put my leftover food in here, put the jar on, and then I can store it in the fridge or even in the freezer. You can even put uncooked meat. In this case, it's a raw piece of chicken that I have right here in a glass jar. And if you bake cookies, you can store your cookies in a glass jar. This is a wide-mouth mason jar, and I have my lovely chocolate chip cookies stored in here. You can also put the cookies in the freezer like this. All right. Now, if you have a bowl of something that's left over, the easiest way is to just put a plate on it. That's all. You're just covering it. Much better than the plastic wrap. And the advantage of putting a plate on the bowl is you can stack other things on top of it. Another thing that I use is sometimes I have these extra covers for my pots that I don't use. And so it fits beautifully over this bowl, and I can stack like this and then put it into my fridge. You got the idea. Now, there are other options. Even though you're not a student anymore and you don't go to school with your lunch, I would encourage you to get some stainless steel lunch boxes because these are great for storing food. This one has different compartments in it, great for leftovers. So that's one style. I have another style here. And what else can I show you? Yeah, and then so these are different jars that I have with flip tops. So basically, my favorite is to use glass jars. Now, you can use these rectangular or square glass containers. The only issue is I think almost all of them come with some kind of plastic cover, but it's still better than using plastic food wrap. Now, my least favorite would be these silicone containers. I know they're very, very popular. They are a great option to Ziploc bags, but it really depends on the quality. Although the base is silicone, there are other chemicals that are woven into the manufacturing of these silicone bags. So just sort of do some research. These do last a long time, so they are a better option for Ziploc bags. Okay, so these are options that I personally use for many years now to cover or to store my food. And I hope that was helpful for you. Now we move on to tip number 3, which is do not use the plastic bags at the supermarket to bring your produce home. I just went to my local supermarket and I brought everything home without plastic bags, with the exception of these loose cucumbers that I got. Fortunately, they do have these compostable bags, which are great. So I'm going to save this bag for my compostables. But otherwise, no plastic bags. And I'm going to show you how to store your fresh produce in your refrigerator without plastic bags. Fresh produce is still respiring, meaning it is fresh and alive. When wrapped in plastic, they can't breathe. Basically, the produce suffocates, wilts, and then dies. All fresh produce releases ethylene, a natural plant hormone involved in the ripening process. When fresh items are wrapped in plastic, the ethylene gas accumulates and causes them to spoil prematurely. Now let me show you how I store my fresh produce. I took out the produce drawer so that I can demonstrate this. I like to line it with a piece of parchment for easy cleaning. And then basically I just lay my vegetables in a layer. So today I have some carrots, some bok choy, I have a head of broccoli, and then I'm also going to add in those cucumbers. I think there's 3 or 4 of them. There we go. And then the next thing is I like to cover them with a damp, clean linen towel. Not wet, but damp. You want to make sure that you wring out the water, and this really helps to keep them nice and fresh. And then I just happen to have 2 peaches. So this is what it looks like. Very simple, no plastic, and the produce will stay a lot fresher. So I hope that you will start to store your fresh produce the same way that I do, because you'll keep them a lot fresher and also save some money too, because they won't be rotting on you in those terrible plastic bags. All right, here are 2 more tips that I would love to share in regards to fresh herbs. How many times have you bought herbs and then they were in a plastic bag, you forgot about them, and they turned really gross and black and yucky, and then you had to throw them away? So don't do that anymore. Do this instead. I did also buy a bunch of parsley. So the first thing you want to do is remove the band that it is wrapped in. Okay, here we go. I'm unwrapping it. And what I usually do is I cut off the bottom about 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to use my knife, cut it off. I'm treating it very much the same way you would treat fresh flowers when you put them in a vase. You want to cut off the tip, and then I have a glass here with some water, and I'm just going to store it like this in the water. This poor parsley is a bit limpy right now because it came from the supermarket, but in a few hours it's going to perk up because it can now drink water and stay nice and fresh. And I just keep my herbs on the counter. That way I'm cutting it and using it within a few days, which is what you want to do with fresh herbs. So this is a bunch of cilantro that I had gotten 2 days ago, and I did the same thing. I snipped off the bottom, I put it in some fresh water, and look how nice and perky it is. All right, another tip I would like to share is if you buy fresh mushrooms, I have some shiitake here, please do not put them in plastic bags. Paper bag is the way to go. You just keep them in a paper bag, store them in the fridge, and they will last a lot longer. Okay, so I hope that all these tips were helpful to you. And we're going to move on to tip number 4.